One guy wrote, if you know him from Spanky and Our Gang as cute little Mickey, then read the book and think of him as the kid now who saw Alfalfa drowning a goat.
Those early years now have finally connected with me. I was in school with Elizabeth Taylor. Natalie Wood was my closest and dearest little sister all my life. I knew.
Oh, Robert, I'm sorry. Robert, can I ask you a question about that?
Yeah.
About Natalie Wood. Yeah, that Natalie Wood. You knew her. You never were intimate with her. You were friends, and you really.
No, we were brother and sister. If anybody ever heard Natalie Wood, I'd eat their head.
Right. Now, let me ask, what do you think about them reopening that case in her death?
They're not really reopening the case. What's going on now is all jive. It's lightweight, trashy jive, and it doesn't mean anything. The real truth will never come out because the cops would have to indict themselves. Let me just tell you briefly. First of all, when somebody drowns, what's the first thing that happens? Do you happen to know? I'll tell you.
No, I do not know.
They sink.
Right.
Because their lungs are full of water, and they sink. Natalie didn't sink. What does that tell you?
Somebody.
Maybe she was dead when she hit the water.
Right.
Now, they say, well, she had on a parka jacket, and that kept her floating. That's nonsense. In those days, the parka jackets were not waterproof, and nothing will sink you faster than wet feathers. So she was floating in the water. Now, the coroner, Thomas Noguchi, who was known as the coroner of the stars.
That's right.
He said that she was drunk. That's nonsense. I never saw Natalie drunk in my life. I saw her drink, but I never, ever saw her drunk. She didn't get drunk. So maybe he was lying about that, too, just like he was lying about the fact that she drowned. Now, here's another interesting thing. In those days, there was no cell phones, anything like that. When you're on a boat, you make radio calls. You go to your radio on your boat, and you call a land radio, and they patch you through to whoever you want to talk to. Now, that night, there were 40 or 50 calls or even more. Robert Wagner wanted to call the president of a network. That's how you do it. When the president calls him, you got to go through a radio. All those radio calls are logged. Who you called and how long you talked. The logs disappeared the next day. How do you know who called? Where those, like the President Kennedy's brain disappeared. Things disappeared. You say, how did that happen? Gee whiz, I don't know nothing. The fact is that there was a lot of juice, a lot of power, and a lot of connections, and nobody ever asked any questions. All the cops had to do the next day was give the captain of the Splendor, that guy who eventually wrote the book, just give him immunity and take him to a grand jury.
Yep.
And nobody did that. Natalie Wood was phobic about water. I never saw her in a swimming pool ever in my life. We'd lay next to the swimming pool, and when it got hot and sweaty, she'd go to the garden hose and wet herself.
Wow.
If I held her hand and we went to the shallow end where the steps are, she'd sit there and put her feet. As long as she could see her feet, she was okay. She was phobic about water. And anybody tells me that she would walk around on a ship at night with that black swirling stuff around her in her pajamas, go to hell.
This is Jonathan Brandmeier.